The subject we are dealing with in this video is a very Salesian one, but also very much to do with Don Bosco. For St. Francis de Sales, it was the question of gentleness and kindness, something that Don Bosco would make his own and repropose as amorevolezza or loving kindness. Salesian gentleness is not about being indulgently yielding, and it's certainly not wedded to weakness of character. For St. Francis de Sales, gentleness was lived, felt and proposed it, and which was a path of lifelong daily conversion for him, had a deeply Christian source. It starts with Jesus who said of himself, "I am meek and humble of heart." To be honest, gentleness is not a single entity. It is one of a pair where the two terms are not even equivalent: kindness and humility. Francis de Sales would say that these two acts of the believer are the basis of holiness. And he also says that kindness and humility are somewhat rare virtues. He would say that we need to be gentle of heart with our neighbor and humble of heart with our God. Salesian gentleness is the combination of things. We were saying that of these two virtues, the promise lies with humility. Francis de Sales said that humility is the first and most fundamental of all virtues, and is what makes our hearts gentle. Let us listen to him.
The Lord loves humility so much that he has no problem saying that we fall into sin and derive holy humility from it. Humility and charity are the master ropes. All the others are attached to them. We need only hold on to these two. One is at the very bottom and the other at the very top. The preservation of the whole building depends on its foundation and its roof. We do not encounter much difficulty in practicing other virtues if we keep our hearts bound to the practice of these two. They are the mother virtues, and the others follow them the way little chicks follow the mother hen.
The virtue of humility, which Francis de Sales cultivated so much and for so long for himself, is a fundamental virtue. When she meets Francis de Sales, Baroness de Chantal begins a correspondence with him and is fascinated by the holiness that emanates from him. She writes to Francis with great respect, even calling him a saint. And this language, this way of saying his miserable person, embarrasses him very much, because in one of the letters, Francis writes to her,
"While I think of it, I must forbid you to use the word saint when you write about me, because my daughter, holiness is more appearance than true in my case, and then canonizing saints is none of your business."
The gentleness that St. Francis de Sales proposes is of two kinds: being gentle with ourselves and gentle with others. One of the most quoted, most often quoted, and certainly most daring of St. Francis de Sales' lines runs as follows: "In education, what we need is a cap of understanding, a barrel of love, and an ocean of patience." This is all the more true if we think that the first educational task is the one with ourselves. This gentleness with ourselves starts with not being surprised at our limitations and frailties, because they are part of nature. We are made this way, and precisely because we are made this way, we are loved by God. This gentleness comes from putting up with our limitations, not harshly, but with much patience, or let's say, with much holy patience. This is not resignation, but comes from humility, and we return to being humble. Humility grows with much mercy. With gospel realism, Francis de Sales says,
"Be patient with everyone, but above all with yourself. Don't be disturbed. I mean, because of your imperfections. Always have the courage to get up again after you fall. I am very glad you make a fresh start every day. There is no better way of reaching perfection in the spiritual life than to be always beginning afresh, never thinking that we have done enough."
Like a good shepherd, and indeed having taken on the attitude of the good shepherd himself, Francis de Sales tends the wounds of his sheep. Here is another excerpt from one of Francis's letters.
We do not have to like our faults, but they should not astonish us or take away our courage. On the contrary, we must draw humility and mistrust of ourselves from them, but not with discouragement, nor affliction of heart, nor even less mistrust of God's love for us. God does not love our faults and venial sins, but just as a child's weakness displeases his mother, and yet she does not cease to love him because of it. Indeed, she loves him tenderly and compassionately. In the same way, God does not cease to love us tenderly.
Speaking about the daily battle of his and our conversion, Francis expresses himself in a particularly interesting oxymoron. He says, one must be gently at war.
Bisogna essere dolcemente in guerra.
His spiritual direction will be especially humane, profound and very wise. It communicated confidence in the person who entrusted themselves to him. It stemmed from a deep spiritual optimism and was certainly powerfully encouraging. Let us listen to some extracts from his spiritual direction.
We must hold these two things together: an extreme affection for good, for daily prayer, for our commitments to improvement, and not be at all disturbed, disquieted, or astonished if we happen to commit faults. The first element depends on our fidelity, which must always be whole and grow from hour to hour. The second depends on our weakness, from which we will never be able to free ourselves in this mortal life. When we commit some fault, let us question our heart and ask it if it has kept the resolution to serve God alive and intact. And then let us say to it, "Why are you grumbling now?" And it will answer, "I was surprised. I don't know how, but now I am so disheartened. Alas, dear daughter, we must forgive this poor heart. It is not because of infidelity that it errs. It is because of weakness."
Gentleness with self surely and clearly finds echoes in gentleness with others. We now want to tell you something of what Francis de Sales has to say about the latter. The key to gentleness with our neighbor comes from Francis. This gentleness, surely, is to be expressed at the level of family, domestic and communal relationships.
We must consider our neighbor in God. When will it happen that we will all be full of gentleness and serenity towards our neighbor? When we know how to see our neighbor's souls in the heart of the divine Savior. Whoever considers their neighbor outside of these runs the risk of not loving them, either with purity or with constancy. But from that perspective, who would not love him? Who would not endure him? Who would find him disagreeable and boring? When our neighbor weighs on us and is disagreeable, only respect for the Savior leads us to love him. And this love is pure and frees us inwardly.
The biographers say that when Francis was a bishop, a young man appeared before him who expressed himself in a decidedly incorrect manner. And Francis rebuked him, of course, but with great moderation, so much so as to arouse the amazement of the people who were listening. When this young man left Francis, he was asked why this moderation, this delicate response of his, clear as it might have been. And Francis said, I am afraid to waste in a quarter of an hour this little liquor of meekness which have been trying to collect for 22 years in the bowl of my heart. In 1957, celebrating the 400th anniversary of St. Francis de Sales' birth, St. Paul VI wrote an apostolic letter entitled Sabao die Gemma, the jewel of Savoy, and it was precisely in portraying St. Francis's gentleness with others that the Pope said,
one finds in him supreme integrity of life, supreme gentleness and benevolence. He was never aggressive in disputes, loved those who err while correcting their errors. And if his positions differed, he never opposed others contentiously. Tenacious in loving, praying and enlightening, he knew how to be enduringly patient, knew how to gradually lead the erring back to the fullness of the truth.
The biographers and historians of St. Francis de Sales say that his gentleness, which was one of his characteristics, was certainly not spontaneous. It did not come to him as a gift of nature. Instead, from nature, following in his father's wake, would come a decidedly strong and even determined character. It took a long time for Francis to build up his Christian gentleness by means of a lifelong conversion that would itself a gentle process. Thus we come to the end of this brief exploration of Salesian gentleness and kindness, and we say goodbye until the next episode where we will say something about Francis de Sales and his philotheas. We could put this in other words: Francis and the feminine world in search of God. It is a decisively interesting chapter that would last his entire life.